I am Kim Aung-soo. I'm going to chair this morning section. Warmly welcome to everyone. Personally, I am very happy to revisit the Bangalore 2012. I had a chance to attend management course as RIMB. Now, 2015, I had another opportunity to visit here again. Just now we have the divided two groups in this morning section. There will be the three speakers in each group. The first, the Dr. Pankaj K. He is going to talk about the ASEAN Myanmar. ASEAN Myanmar is a very interesting topic because the ASEAN is playing very important role in the region, and I believe Dr. Pankaj talk will be an interesting topic. He will give us very interesting insight and his experience on the topic. May I request Mr. Dr. Pankaj to make your presentation.
Am I audible? Okay, fair enough. Good morning. Let's start the morning with a joke. It's my temptation to really start with a joke. It goes something like this, that a professor of philosophy asked a student that you have failed. Tell me what were the reasons? He said, forget about everything, professor. Let me ask you 3 questions. He said, fair enough. Good. Ask me. I am the scholar of philosophy. I will definitely tell you whatever the question says. He said, sir, can you tell me these 3 questions, answers to this? Then I will recognize myself as a failed student. Otherwise, you will give me A+ grade. That was a challenge to the ego of the professor. The student asked, what is legal but irrational? Second, what is illegal but rational? And third, which is both illegal and irrational? The professor couldn't answer the question. He surrendered and gave that failed boy A+. A real severe dealt to his blow. The professor reached out to his best brilliant student and asked, can you tell me the answers of these 3 questions? He said, sir, it's very simple. He said, okay, tell me, enlighten me. He said, what is legal and irrational is you. He said, why? He said, it is illegal for you, a professor of 65-year-old person, to marry a 30-year-old woman. But it's irrational. He said, fair enough. He said, the second, what is illegal and rational? He said, your wife is 30 years old. She loves a young boy, which is illegal but rational. He said, fair enough. He said, what is illegal and irrational? He said, the boy who loves your wife, you gave him A+, which is both illegal and irrational. Okay, now coming to the core question, ASEAN and Myanmar. There has been some issues which have always enlightened the discourse with regard to ASEAN interaction with Myanmar. Usually whenever we talk about ASEAN, is it a forum which can really influence internal dynamics of any country? Many people say, as the mandate of most of the Southern Asian countries, regional multilateral organizations, be it the SAARC or ASEAN, the non-interference in the domestic politics of any countries is a simple no-no for these multilateral institutions. And this serves the purpose because many of the institutions within the Southern Asia, including South and Southeast Asia, are not as dynamic to take criticism with regard to their internal politics. In case of Southeast Asia, there were 3 major pillars of any nation building, which included military also. So whenever the colonial phase really ended, these militaries were seen as a necessary evil for building the nation because of the ethnic and religious fissures which were really existent in all these countries. You take the case of Myanmar, you take the case of Philippines, you take the case of Indonesia. However, in any regional setting, there are 2 important elements to coerce any country to really shift towards democracy. These 2 are, first, there are multilateral institutions in which democracy is a prerequisite for membership, which is missing in the case of ASEAN. Second, there are regional effects, something like Arab Spring, which brings about a contagion effect in any country to bring about change in its institutions, which again is missing in the case of Southeast Asia. Given these issues, ASEAN was nudging Myanmar in a way, but was not taking a very proactive action while engaging with Myanmar because of certain issues which were I deliberated upon. Now, in case when I talk about the military as a necessary evil for nation building, you say there is a compromise formula which exists between military and those different ethnic groups and subnational identities which are existing in any new nation state. And Arendt Liebhardt really suggests this is a consocial democracy or a form of power sharing between different ethnic groups as a method for avoiding ethnic conflict and achieving political stability. In other words, a certain type of democracy can still be applied to multi-ethnic society without resorting to authoritarian rule. For military rulers, however, the widespread association of democracy with civilian supremacy has created a particular crisis of legitimacy. Now, also you need to see what exactly were the basic benchmarks within the ASEAN and Myanmar to really engage each other in due course of time. If you see the ASEAN when it was formed, it was seen more of an anti-communist bloc, to which Myanmar said, I am not really going to get into the bandwagon because I will be spoiling my relationships with China. Further, Myanmar was also involved in the non-aligned movement, and therefore it was really apprehensive of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which was joined by many of the Southeast Asian countries. Also, the trajectory of the ASEAN for the 2 or 3 decades since its formation was primarily to discuss the economic growth and develop the agenda for more congenial environment, economic environment, investment and other issues. If 1997 economic crisis would not have happened, the tectonic changes in the ASEAN thinking and its cohesive formation would not have taken shape, because Myanmar used to draw heavily from what exactly Indonesia was really experimenting in its larger scheme of things. 1997, you've seen Indonesia really trying to really get into the more scheme of evolving a better growth, which was not completely guided democracy, and Myanmar used to take examples from that. So what exactly transpired to make Myanmar as a member of ASEAN, and whether these whole issue of engaging Myanmar really paid dividends for the ASEAN in the long run. Now, if you see in the initial stages, 1997, there was a lot of resistance from EU, US to really not to engage Myanmar into the ASEAN forum. But the resistance was refuted as well as to a large extent was many of the leaders didn't succumb to it, including Mahathir Mohamad, who was very adamant on including Myanmar into the larger ASEAN multilateral forum, because he said we are a different sort of a setup and we can't really import that sort of Western democratic norms to abhor or bar any country from the membership. But however, subsequently, the issues which were raised with regard to really, easing out of the Myanmar in terms of economic liberalization, more political participation, and all those things were very incremental, but it sufficed ASEAN to engage Myanmar in a big way. Subsequently, when there was an issue of Myanmar gaining the chair in ASEAN, there were certain pressures which were exerted on the Myanmar not to get it because of certain incidents which have happened. Myanmar also, because of cajoling and some suggestions from the ASEAN, said that it needs to really bring about the political reforms and work on national reconciliation, and it forfeited that ASEAN membership. Many of the scholars say that this forfeiture of the membership was not very well in terms of its incremental progression towards democracy, because if it would have gained the chair at that point of time, it would have somehow compelled the Myanmar military junta to really bring about changes in a more sustained manner. However, in due course of time, what exactly has happened, that relationship between the China, Burma and ASEAN developed in a way that they become much more cohesive in terms of investment, trade and growth. And this facilitated Myanmar to get more integrated into the ASEAN framework of things. However, in terms of Myanmar's own thinking towards ASEAN, the first and foremost issue which it tried to address was it said it is willing to sign the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, which was the first benchmark for any country to either become a dialogue partner or membership of ASEAN, which was which facilitated its more better integration with the organization. Now, if you say that whether ASEAN in a way forced Myanmar to bring about changes in its governance structures, I will take certain very cautious words to it, that Myanmar wasn't coerced. It was just given a nudge to really make certain reforms, and these reforms were in 4 major areas. First, open up a meaningful dialogue with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League of Democracy to a certain extent, which has been achieved. Make full use of the good offices of the UN Secretary General, primarily Professor Gambari, who visited Myanmar a number of times to really make Myanmar incremental changes, and lift restrictions on Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, which again was lifted, and release of political prisoners, which a substantial number of them have already been released. And the issue of work towards peaceful transition of democracy, which again 2015 elections will mark whether there has been some changes or not, on address the economic difficulties faced by the people of Myanmar. If you see the trajectory of the investment and trade between ASEAN and Myanmar, it is the second largest trading partner as a grouping for Myanmar, as well as investment in the Myanmar. How the ASEAN as an institution worked towards building certain bridges between EU and US is a matter which should be stressed and which should be studied very carefully. If you see that resistance with regard to EU and US letting the Myanmar take the chairmanship, the resistance in 2004, 2005, much more stern. But however, in due course of time, when 2014 Myanmar took the chairmanship, the resistance was much more less and was much more accommodative towards the Myanmar. This also gave a leeway to Myanmar to get into the Asia-Europe meeting, which is known as ASEAN, which includes EU, ASEAN members, and which is a relatively large grouping. And this ASEAN dialogue addresses political, economic, and cultural issues with the respect and equal partnership. It's not only that the ASEAN really calibrated its moves to Myanmar, but it also really, in a way, toned down the resistance towards Myanmar whenever there were certain international NGOs and other groups which were raising the issue of human rights, as well as certain political liberal values which needs to be incorporated into the Myanmar superstructure. And these resistance came from a number of EU groups, which included Red Cross, Amnesty International, and all those things. They have given representations to leaders of the EU at that time, France or Germany at times, and which France and Germany, which were much more open to really integrating Myanmar into larger scheme of thing, international body, really facilitated Myanmar into a larger global community. Now, if you see the number of changes that the Myanmar has brought about since 2010 onwards, when ASEAN was seen as a more vocal, more giving a right kind of direction to the Myanmar, you see that Myanmar has made changes to its foreign domestic investment. It has made changes to its mining liberalization as well as telecommunication sectors and all those things. It's not that ASEAN has not even made references with regard to the institutions and the institutional mechanism in Myanmar. It has made such certain remarks way back in 2004, again in 2007. So it's something very calibrated moves towards the Myanmar, which has done a lot of good to Myanmar. In fact, if you see that Myanmar's ASEAN chairmanship the last year, the issues were raised that whether Myanmar will go the Cambodia way, in which the ASEAN communique wasn't released, and it was seen that it has become a Chinese outhouse when communique wasn't released. Myanmar made 2 very major landmark, what is called projections to its outlook. It raised the issue of South China Sea, which is laudable, because many people said that China will again manipulate Myanmar not to do this. And second, it really instituted the national human rights body, which can address those issues even though in a very calibrated, incremental manner. So these 2 issues have really shown that Myanmar does have the intention to get back to its roots, to the larger international community. However, Myanmar, you need to understand from the point of view of ASEAN as well as from the India, that Myanmar's governance structures are too fragile, too nascent, and demanding too much from them might really lead to the crumbling of the institution. And there is always an issue that whether the military junta which always sees that these international NGOs like Amnesty International and all those things might charge these military junta retrospectively in terms of the war crimes or whatever they have done to the civilian population. That sort of calibrated move is really required. Now coming to why is this, this marriage between ASEAN and Myanmar is important for India, because if I don't refer to India, it will be too short. There are 4 major issues which are of interest for us, given the fact that ASEAN and Myanmar have a very complex sort of equation. First, ASEAN energy grid is not yet complete. Once it reaches to the Myanmar, it is definitely going to integrate to the South Asian grid and create a bigger network of energy grid, which might give a future perspective to our energy requirement in the long run. The issue why this whole energy grid is important, because none of the countries are too big mass producers of oil and gas. The thing is that India has the biggest refining capacities, which can be tapped in the long run, and many of the refining capabilities of India is underutilized. Second is ASEAN defense industry. Even though that ASEAN defense industry is still in a very nascent stages, but given the fact that Myanmar has the resources, the land, to really build up an ancillary unit to that larger network of defense industry, then India will also need to integrate its northeast with that larger defense industry, so that a more integrated global value chain could be created in terms of defense products within the Southern Asia. The third is ASEAN connectivity network. I'm particularly very interested in the fiber optic networks. If you see that national fiber optic network, we are really getting the knowledge network grid within the South Asia, and we want to integrate to the larger regions so that the knowledge grid can be really formulated. In case that sort of grid is also being envisaged in the Southeast Asia, we will create one of the biggest knowledge grids in the whole region. And last, Myanmar does have SEZs which are to a large extent valuable for us, be it the case of Thilewa or in and around Sitwe, because that will integrate India into the larger global regional value chain, which India has been completely missing because we are somehow not integrated into that regional value chain. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj, for your very comprehensive talk, and really inspiring. Especially you trying to cover a wide range of the issue on Myanmar and ASEAN, the relation. Yes, I agree. India continuously study the relation, the Myanmar and ASEAN. Also, the relationship between Myanmar and India is very much important. Your former, the first Prime Minister, Mr. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru said, and I quote, as in the past, so in the future, the people of India will stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Burma, and whether we have to share good fortune or ill fortune, we shall share it together. My personal assessment is that we will have the good fortune for being the member of the ASEAN. Thank you very much.